Welcome to Changing Higher Ed, a podcast dedicated to helping higher education leaders improve their institutions, with your host, Dr. Drum McNaughton, CEO of The Change Leader, a management consultancy that helps higher ed leaders transform their institutions through holistic approaches to accreditation, institutional governance, strategic planning and implementation, university academics and operations, change management, leadership and culture, and marketing, positioning, and branding. Now here's your host, Dr. Drum McNaughton.
Welcome to Changing Higher Ed. Our guest today is Grant Aldrich. Grant is the CEO of OnlineDegree.com, a rapidly growing ed tech platform where students receive college credit toward their degree, tuition-free. OnlineDegree.com prepares adult students for higher education and works with participating accredited universities to award transfer credit for successful completion of the courses, giving working adults a bridge to starting their path back to school, regardless of their finances or busy schedules. Grant has a unique insight into the OPM market, and he'll share with us how he cracked the nut when it comes to helping higher ed institutions grow enrollment in the area of post-traditional students. Grant, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Drum.
My pleasure. I've been looking forward to having this. We're going to have a great conversation today, and I think it's going to be very educational for university presidents because we're going to talk about OPM, online program management, some of the things that are out there, some of the pros and cons that you as university president should be thinking about. So let's get started. Grant, what's going on with OPM these days?
Yeah, I think we're going to see a very dramatic shift in the way that the OPM market is structured. I don't think that people really foresee what's going to happen, but I think it's going to be radically different from where we are today currently. Well,
so before we get into that, what does OPM mean other than online program management? And what's important for university presidents to know about it as they're going in and potentially exploring this?
It's a good question. And I think this is actually evolved quite a bit over the years, because I think, many years ago, the concept was that many institutions didn't have all of the wherewithal and talent to be able to ramp up their online programs. And that means from soup to nuts. So starting at the conception of what programs to create, program creation, and then of course thereafter, the student recruitment, the student retention, and the support side of it. So really an end-to-end solution. Although I think that as time has progressed from the early days to now, OPMs have really shifted into more of the recruitment, the retention, and the support, because universities, with the emergence of online education, have adopted a lot of these things in-house. We've got a lot of experience and a lot of different things we can point to in terms of success, and so it's not as open or undefined as it once was. So I think that now the OPM definition definitely fits that latter explanation, and most universities look at them at still some online program support, but mostly in the recruitment, retention, and support services for students, which frankly most universities don't do very well. I think that when they have an honest conversation with themselves, they would realize that in those cases that these are things that probably are more appropriately utilized by an outside group.
Well, I think you're right in many of those respects. One of the things that is interesting is because OPMs have provided the programs, courses for students take, that they needed to have good metrics, good assessment built into them. Now, just out of the most recent negotiated rulemaking back in DC, there was a push by OPMs and some for-profit educations to allow curriculum to be provided by outside entities at 100% level, and that got shot back down to the 50% level. So I think that's going to make a big difference as we go forward too, don't you think?
I agree.
And so you're going to see, you alluded to some changes that we're going to be seeing in these markets? Where do you think it's going?
I actually think that we're going to move away from a university-centric model to more of a student-centric model. And of course, what does that mean? I think as of today, the sentiment from the institutional side regarding OPMs is definitely one of a tolerance and a kind of looking at it as a necessary evil. And the reason being is that I think that they understand that this is something and a wherewithal or a knowledge that we don't have in-house, and that there are professionals that are really good at providing these services, and that in a competitive environment that we're seeing among higher education institutions, that recruitment is becoming a growing challenge. So with all of those circumstances, there definitely is a demand, but I think the growing sentiment is that the prices are too high. They take a considerable amount of the tuition as part of their services, and that the contracts are very lengthy. And all of those things combined have now really started to have a sea change in that so many more OPMs have come on the market. And so a lot of the services that they've provided have started to become more commoditized. So from one sense, you've got this shift in the market right now where we're moving towards providers who are able to lower their costs, take a lower share, which is great for the universities. But at the same time, it's not as if those services are really any different or have really evolved or become any new than what they once were. It's still an agency relationship. And when they go out and they try to recruit or retain students, provide these services, it's at the benefit of the university. And that's why I call it university-centric. However, there really is a lack in the marketplace right now, or there was, for a third-party resource that was in the student's interest, right? What is the best way for the students to choose that best fit and get the support that they need, and of course, benefit the university at the same time?
Well, that makes perfect sense. So what I'm hearing you say is that instead of an OPM providing services for the university, they really should be directed more at who the university customer is, and that is the student.
Correct. And I know that we feel that those things are aligned in the current system, and to a certain extent you could argue that. But the problem is that in any relationship, where you're actively out in the marketplace, marketing for one entity, of course, you're going to be pushing to meet those enrollment numbers. And a lot of the time, you're going to be bringing in students who potentially aren't ready or who are maybe not a great fit for your institution. Because that's a problem, right? Let's say we're going to spend so many marketing dollars and we're going to get those first 100 students in. Well, maybe those were the wrong students, but because the incentive structure is such that I've got an agency who's going to be doing the marketing to try to fill as many of those seats as possible, and it's really not in their best interest to try to figure out, is this student the right fit for my institution as opposed to as another? Well, then all of those dollars go towards that 100 students that perhaps were not the good fit. And I think that that's a paradigm that we've not focused on and looking at. Why are the attrition rates so much higher for adult and online students?
Well, I think for many of those answers, they're, as the saying goes, intuitively obvious to the most casual observer. when you've got not post-traditional students, 24 to 70 years old, who are going back to school for one of three reasons. They need a degree to get a job, they want more money, or they need a degree to get a better job. Then you're looking at different than your typical traditional 18 to 24 year olds. Now, with that perspective, you've also got universities who you would assume are doing good marketing to try and bring in the right kind of students, but is the program that the OPM providing doing what the university needs it to do? I think that's the big question.
I would agree, and that's correct. Really, as we've shifted from the traditional 18-year-old student, or to 12, you said to 24, who is coming directly from high school, to the adult learner and the concept of lifelong learning or returning to school to improve their marketability, that is a big dramatic shift. And I think in that shift, you're right. If we apply these old same tactics where it's just a straight recruitment advertising message where, okay, I'm hitting the airwaves, other institutions are hitting the airwaves, how is that really doing anything different? And how does that, and how from the student's perspective, with all of these issues that they're not, they're not going back in greater numbers to higher education, how do they really discern the difference between either of those? Because again, for that demographic, there really is no support to help them understand. And I think one other big trend that we've seen that's very concerning is how all of, and I think that this is all related to this same approach that we've been taking, is that all of this demographic, I think it's estimated to be 35 million working adults, are choosing higher education alternatives in greater numbers. So that's very challenging as well, because I think we then have to ask ourselves, well, why is that the case? Why has it been? It's not just cost. Why is it that in these cases, these students are starting to opt out of higher education? And so I think that by going into the student-centric mindset, by putting that student first, now we've got a real paradigm to try to solve that problem.
I think you're right. So what does that student-centric paradigm look like?
So I actually can see it manifesting itself in many ways. But I'll describe the way that I've approached this and how I've looked at this. I created a company called onlinedegree.com, and the premise of it is to help students bridge back to higher education to help them complete their degree, and at the same time providing students for higher education who would be far better prepared, who would be motivated, and would then likely finish their program and at lower recruitment costs. And to achieve something like that, the way that I approach that, right, because that's the ultimate goal for everyone to win. And so the way that I've approached that is that we've created a platform that is essentially a credit-bearing immersion program where a student can come on, take college-level courses from us, being a non-collegiate provider, and we've worked out direct articulation with a variety of institutions where they can earn credit for those courses and unlock, certain scholarships and things that are available. And it's completely free for the student. And so that's the first part of the equation. There's two parts of the equation. The first is that we really have to look at the needs of the working adults. And the real needs for the working adults they are very cost sensitive. They are very busy in their daily lives with children and jobs, and jumping into the pool and jumping into a traditional program or going into enrollment process is a very scary and time-consuming thing that they don't know if they've got the wherewithal to do. And so by tearing down all of these walls, the psychological impediments, the physical impediments, and the financial impediments, truly creating a novel approach where you can have a platform where people can get started and really see if higher education learning is for them. And that's really what it is on the first side of the equation is, get students and tear down all the barriers, make it free, start taking some courses, working with a modern LMS, and proving to themselves they've got the time management, that they've got the acumen to be successful, and especially in an online format, in a self-paced format, and then prepare them for enrolling at an institution. And at the same time, because you're creating a platform that is built for the student, you're also creating a platform that can be open and in the best interest for the universities as well, and I'll explain. If you're providing really good coaching throughout that process and helping students figure out what is that best pathway, what is that, what's that good fit for them in terms of the program that they need, well then, if you have an open platform where you've got pathways to every university in the country, you can really then say, okay, Y institution is really a great fit for you and not X. And of course, that provides a huge recruitment flow and feeder to that institution for that student, where the next student may be a good candidate for the other one. But it's a way to bridge students in and with the economics, provide a situation where you can take students to each of these institutions, help them enroll, and again, you don't have that conflict of interest.
Well, that makes perfect sense because you're working with the student to give him or her whatever they need. And it sounds like you've been able to overcome a lot of those barriers for students who may not have gone to college or needed to go to work immediately following high school by providing something that is free along with the coaching that's necessary, the advisement. That makes a lot of sense to me.
You're absolutely right. It's been working phenomenally well. So we launched in July of 2018, and we had a month where we allowed pre-enrolls. And the goal at first was, of course, to gauge whether students would actually be interested in a program like this. Would it resonate? And we had over 1,000 students pre-enroll with no marketing whatsoever. An incredible wave. I mean, that's no easy feat. And since then, we've seen just an overwhelming support as we've begun to get traction in a lot of publications like Forbes and Inside Higher Ed and more word of mouth, where we've got thousands of students now coming in for a program like this. And so it's definitely shown that we've tapped into a secret sauce in helping simplify the process for working adults to approach higher education and to remove those barriers. And then in addition to that, we've seen an overwhelming support from the institutions. We've got excellent institutions that have come on board to partner with us, who articulate with us, and we work with very closely. Very large state schools, private universities, mostly private nonprofit. So the program's been working incredibly well on that side. We've been seeing very good outcomes of students being able to get the support they need. We try to find the great fit for them and placing those students, and it's been going incredibly well. So I think that as a model, it's excellent. And so the corollary to that, now kind of circling back with the OPM side, is that if you've got platforms like ours, Online Degree, where it's all about the offering and about being student-centric, you solve so many of the problems that we see in the current OPM dynamic. Because, for example, when an institution comes to work with us, we also are a bundled service provider in that we provide student recruitment, retention, and all the different support services for students who originate from our platform. And so all of the barriers then for a university to work with us have been removed as well. So in that model, it's, there's no lengthy contracts, there's no exclusivity, and the economics are far better because we have these students who are coming on, and it's 90% lower than what you would typically get working with a traditional OPM provider. So all of that makes complete sense. For more prepared students who are more likely to finish their program at a lower cost without all of the downsides of the contracts with the current OPM space. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, where I see this model going is that as we are going to be providing for any working adult looking to go back to school, we provide this place for them to ease back in and wade in the pool. And we don't care where they go, right? We work with every great university in the space, and it's our interest to make sure they find that right fit. And so all of those schools will eventually get a good flow of students that meet their fit. And so I really see that this is going to be the shift for universities as well, because why participate with one OPM in a university-centric model that's exclusive with high economics? Why not work with many organizations like OnlineDegree.com that are student-centric, that we can participate in, and with better economics that are not exclusive?
Well, one of the big things with OPMs right now is that exclusivity and the cost. It sounds like you've been able to crack that nut, which is great to see. The other thing is the preparedness of students. We recently had a guest on, Karen Haynes, who is the former president of Cal State San Marcos, and her claim to fame, and rightly so, was the graduating classes at Cal State San Marcos over the past few years have been 50% first-generation students. Now, that is a huge, huge feather in her cap and the entire universities. And the way she said they got there was through a lot of counseling, a lot of advisement. And this is an area where many institutions are actually cutting back. So it sounds like, the combination of what you're doing with no cost to the student and the advisement really is a great way to do it.
It's funny that you bring that up. That's incredible. I wasn't familiar with that story, but I'm definitely going to look at that more, because I agree. If there was one defining characteristic that I think is the key differentiator, aside from it being free, is the support, is the guidance. Because you've got this large group of people, millions of Americans, and of course, one question would be, well, why hasn't the community college system benefited these people? But I think the fact is that aside from the cost aspect, although it's lower, is that the support at those organizations is virtually limited or non-existent. Because how can you provide that kind of experience to every student? They just don't have the resources. And I think that if you do focus on the support, you do reap the benefits. And I think that that's what we're trying to provide in not only a platform that has an amazing value proposition that appeals to getting them to take that first step, but then once they're there, the support and guidance to help them make that right decision. Because if all of those 35 million Americans made that first step, there would be it would solve all of these problems with recruitment, because there would definitely be a student for every single institution, and you'd be able to find that right fit for every single one of them. There wouldn't be a problem. The problem is in this rush to market and outmarket, that nobody's listening anymore. And I think that's the problem.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. One of the other benefits of OPM or a firm similar to yours is that when you take a look at faculty and shared governance, up until the recent negotiated rulemaking, faculty had the final say on curriculum. Now, the NEGREG, the negotiated rulemaking, says that is not the case, and that's going to be guidance coming down from the Department of Education. Be that as it may, when you've got faculty who are involved, they really don't want to be teaching those general education courses that folks need as part of their degree. You can provide those at a far less cost than the university can. Why wouldn't they go with something like that?
It's a great point. You're right. From a faculty standpoint, most of these institutions have brilliant professors. And let's say an example of a mathematician. A brilliant mathematician really has very little interest in teaching the 101 course. They normally have a much greater satisfaction working with students later on who have a passion for the material. So I think you're absolutely right. I think it's one of those necessary evils. And I think there's also, I remember a lot of people from the outside, when first coming up with this concept, said, are the institutions going to push back in that, they have to obviously give up a certain period of time, let's say the first year, 40 or 60 credits, they have to forego that for these students to come in because they would be earning that on your platform. And my point always was, well, no, I don't think so, because this is a paradigm that they definitely understand that, we're making the pie larger. These are students who would not have approached higher education similar to a community college had they not had a program like this. So by increasing the pie of students, it's a much greater value, even if you're foregoing 44 to 60 units. And of course, with the addition of the benefits that you described, these are usually general ed courses, electives, that they really don't have much faculty interest in teaching anyhow.
And the students really can't go to a community college because they can't take the time away from work.
That's exactly right. So that was also part of it, was that, sadly, I think that at the community college level, you've got excellent people and, very intelligent people working in those, from the faculty to the administration. But I think that a lot of times the institution of the community college, being a government-run entity, is in many cases behind. I think that's understandable. Government typically doesn't move well. This is a public benefit, and it has certain designs for that. But I think that now, as things have accelerated towards online, they have not been able to adapt quickly enough to meet that. And that's another thing. So I think that in solutions that we're going to start to see like ours, where it is fully online and accessible, people don't have to skip work to take that first step. They don't have to have the cost associated with it, and they can get the support they need. Really touching on the things of what these people really are, customers, and what they've been asking for.
And that's the biggest reason why many institutions have moved to the OPM model, and a model similar to yours. When you take a look at it from a business case, faculty cost a lot of money, probably the biggest percentage of your budget. And if you've got faculty who don't want to be teaching in those lower areas, it's a win-win for both faculty and the university. And so we're getting close to the end of our time. What are 3 things that you would recommend to university presidents if they're considering an OPM model?
The first thing I would say, because I think that's a very good question, is that I would tend to agree that it's probably worth a introspective look to analyze, do we really have the wherewithal internally to engage in any of these kinds of programs, or do we need some outside help? And I think that's a fair, because I don't think that, my organization's kind of been dubbed the anti-OPM or the student-centric OPM. So I don't have a vested interest in saying whether there, should be a traditional OPM relationship. But I think that honest assessment should be made. And then I think that if you are going to create it, you have to make sure that you can work with, you aren't going to be hamstrung in those kinds of relationships, that you can actually work and adaptively work with programs like ours, or programs that are very similar, that are doing these kind of student-centric approaches. And then finally is really to start to embrace the student-centric, non-traditional adult type programs like ours, because we're one of those. And I think that we're actually, and of course this is biased, but I think what we're doing is the most innovative, and that's why we're doing it. However, there are numerous ones out there, and I think that a lot of institutions have not taken that first step to embrace non-traditional and things that really benefit adult students and make your institution more attractive for them. So that's I think, how I would look into something like that.
Well, thank you. That's great advice. And when you stop and think about it, 74% of all the students come in, they are categorized as post-traditional, that 24 to 70-year-old student. So 74%, that's a pretty big percentage of folks, and they're making their choices for where they're going to attend generally within 50 miles of where they live, and that's regardless of whether it's face-to-face, on the ground, online, or blended programs. And so when you take a look at those kind of demographics and market research, then you can't be everything to everyone. You have to really pick your markets and understand what you're best at and focus on those. So with that, what's next for Grant? Where do you see yourself going? Where do you see onlinedegree.com going?
Yeah, well, thank you. I foresee that our student-centric model is going to be the standard in the years to come. I mean, again, why, with better economics, a better approach to helping students bridge themselves back, we've really tried to make it where every constituent, all of their interests are aligned. The student, the institution, the taxpayer, and ours as well, is aligned in helping the student find the great fit for them and to complete their degree. So we've had just an overwhelming wave of support from different institutions coming on board. It's been excellent, and student interest as well. So I see that it's going to be a very exciting time as we continue to grow this model and really, I think, supplant the current paradigm that it's been in place that really nobody's happy with.
Well, that's great. So Grant, want to thank you so much for being on the show. I think this has been a great primer for folks with respect to OPMs and the positives, the negatives, where the market's evolving. It's been a great show. Thank you.
Drum, wonderful time. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. Take care. Thanks for listening this week, and a special thank you to this week's special guest, Grant Aldrich of OnlineDegree.com, and his take on how university presidents can take advantage of the changing OPM marketplace. Our next guest is a frequent guest on the show, Tom Netting, who'll be talking to us about the most recent goings-on in Washington regarding reauthorization of the Higher Education Act, the publishing of Neg Reg 2019 focused on accreditation bodies and innovation, and the Department of Education. Thanks for listening. See you next time.
Changing Higher Ed is a production of The Change Leader, an organization committed to transforming higher ed institutions. Find more information about this topic, along with show notes on this episode, at changinghighered.com. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to the show, and we would also value your honest rating and review. Email any questions, comments, or recommendations for topics or guests to podcast@changinghighered.com. Changing Higher Ed is produced and hosted by Dr. Drum McNaughton. Post-production by David L. White.